Hello everyone, I am the storyteller and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Get comfortable and relax.
When you're a ranger in a large forest, you learn to distinguish between natural noises and those that shouldn't be there. The wind whistling through the leaves, the snapping of branches under the feet of wild animals. All of these are so familiar that they become part of the rhythm of life there. But that night, there was a sound that was different, a sound that didn't belong in the forest. It was a scream. The scream was long and loud, echoing through the quiet, tearing through the night. It wasn't the scream of someone hurt or lost. It was sharp and terrifying, like someone running away from something terrible. It only lasted a few seconds, but it froze me, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my patrol car. The area where I heard the scream was deep in the woods, with no official trails, and certainly no authorized campsites. No one should have been there at that hour. But if there were people, I had to find out what had happened. I turned on my headlights and drove toward the sound, meter by meter, my heart beating faster with each turn. The darkness was thick on both sides of the road, the headlights only illuminating a few meters ahead. I stopped at a small trail leading into the woods. The air outside was so cold that my breath turned into thin wisps of smoke. Grabbing my flashlight and walkie-talkie, I stepped outside, trying to dispel the anxiety in my heart. But as soon as I took my first step onto the trail, I realized that the silence here was unusual. There were no crickets, no night birds, just a heavy silence, as if the forest were holding its breath. And then I saw it. On the trail, right in front of me were footprints, large and deep but irregular. They led straight into the darkness, as if inviting me to follow. I stood there, flashlight in hand, looking at the tracks ahead. Part of me wanted to get back in the car and leave, but the other part of me forced myself forward. Something was wrong, and I knew this night would be unlike any other I had ever experienced. I followed the footprints, the flashlight beam sweeping over every tree and bush. The air grew heavier as I walked. After about 10 minutes, I heard something. At first, it was faint, like leaves rustling in the wind. But as I walked deeper, I realized it wasn't the wind. It was whispering. Soft voices came from the woods, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. They didn't sound like a language I had ever heard, just low, repetitive sounds. I stopped, trying to listen more closely. Suddenly, the whispering stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. As I turned my flashlight forward, the light fell on a figure standing in the middle of the trail. The man stood about 20 meters away from me, completely motionless. He was tall, thin, and wearing a dark coat. His face was hidden in the darkness, but I could feel his eyes staring at me. I said, "Hey, what are you doing here? This is a restricted area at night." But he didn't answer, nor did he move. I took a step forward, the flashlight beam shining directly at him. But as soon as the light touched him, he turned and walked deeper into the forest. I don't know what compelled me, but I decided to follow. There was something about him that I couldn't ignore. My steps became more hurried, the sound of dry leaves crunching under my feet. But no matter how fast I walked, the distance between us never shortened. After about 15 minutes of chasing, I came to a small clearing in the forest. In the middle of it was an old shack, seemingly abandoned for a long time. I realized the footprints led straight into the tent, and the tent door was still open. I approached, holding the flashlight tightly. As I stood right in front of the tent, a foul smell filled my nose, making me nauseous. I called out, "Is anyone in there?" But there was no answer. I shined the flashlight into the tent, and what I saw made my heart sink. Inside were photos plastered all over the walls. They were all of people, but the scary thing was that the people in the photos were all frequent visitors to the area. In the middle of the tent was a wooden table, on which was a large knife and a notebook. I opened the notebook and saw scrawled words. They never left. I saw them. They knew me. Just then, I heard footsteps outside the tent. A figure just passed by the door, so fast that I could only catch a glimpse. I rushed outside, shining my flashlight everywhere, but saw nothing. The forest fell silent again. I decided not to stay any longer. I quickly retreated, running back to the trail. But as I approached the patrol car, I noticed something on the hood of my car. It was the missing couple's phone. The screen was still on, and on it was a text message, "Don't come back." I jumped into the car and drove away immediately. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I saw a figure standing at the edge of the forest, watching my car. The next day, I reported the incident and led a search party to the area. But when we arrived, the tent was gone, along with all traces. The camping couple was never found, and their story became an unsolved mystery. Since then, I have always wondered, who was that stranger? What did he want? And why did those footprints lead me to that place? Sometimes on my late night patrols, I still hear whispers in the forest, and each time, I tell myself, the forest is never completely quiet. There is always someone listening. I am a park ranger working in a national reserve for over 12 years. My job requires me to patrol the most remote areas of the forest, where there is no phone signal, no clear trails, and the silence is so overwhelming that you feel like you are the only person in the world. But I know the forest is never completely quiet. It has whispers, stories that you never want to hear. This story happened one cold winter when I was assigned to check a campsite deep in the forest. It was a place that few people knew about, only seasoned explorers. The entrance to the area was a small trail, almost hidden by snow and dense trees. That night, the temperature dropped so low that my breath came out in white clouds. The flashlight in my hand shone down the trail, its light flickering in the thick fog. As I approached the campsite, something strange happened. An unusual stench filled the air. It was a rotten smell, like animal carcasses, but stronger, and I had to cover my nose. As I entered the campsite, I saw a mossy green tent, but it had collapsed, as if someone or something had trampled it. Nearby, a small fire had died down, leaving only cold ashes. I called out, "Ranger, anyone there?" But there was no answer. I approached the tent, my heart pounding with unease. Pulling up the tent flap, I found a backpack, some torn snacks, and what chilled me the most, a notebook. It was smudged with ink from melting snow, but I could still read a few lines. "They're watching me. I hear them at night. They're not human." I felt a chill run down my spine. Who were they? I wondered, trying to stay calm. But the strangeness didn't stop there. As I stepped out of the tent, my flashlight picked up footprints in the snow. They were unlike any human or animal footprints I'd ever seen, long and winding, as if some four-legged creature were crawling along the ground. As I tried to figure it out, a whisper came from deep in the woods. At first, it was faint, like the wind whistling through the branches. But as it got clearer, it became more and more distinct, like a faint voice calling my name. "Jake! Jake!" I flinched. No one knew I was here. How did they know my name? I shined my flashlight into the woods, the light sweeping across the black trees. Nothing, but I had the feeling that someone or something was there, hiding in the shadows. I began to back away, step by step, toward my patrol car. Then I heard it, a sound like quick footsteps coming toward me. I turned and ran, leaving the tent and everything behind. My flashlight shook with each step, and the footsteps behind me grew louder and heavier. I didn't dare to turn around. When I got back to the ranger station, I immediately called my colleague, Mike, to go back to the area with me. We brought weapons and a team of sniffer dogs to check. The next night, we returned to the campsite, but the tent was gone. All traces were covered in snow. However, using the sniffer dogs, we found a trail that led deeper into the forest. The further we went, the clearer the footprints became, and the stench from the day before became stronger. Finally, we came to an open area in the middle of the forest. There, we found an old, almost collapsed wooden cabin. When we entered the cabin, the space inside made me shiver. The walls of the cabin were covered with strange writings, written in dried blood. They were not in any language I had ever seen. In the corner of the cabin, a torn straw doll lay. Next to it, a large bone whose origin I did not dare to think of. As we examined the cabin closely, the whispering began again. It was no longer faint like before, but louder and clearer, like dozens of voices speaking at once. The police dogs began barking madly and pulling on their leashes, trying to run away from the area. Mike looked at me, his face drained of color. "We shouldn't be here," he said, his voice trembling. I nodded and signaled to retreat. As we left the cabin, a dark shadow flashed between the trees. It was so fast that I couldn't see it clearly, only a pair of red eyes glowing in the darkness. After returning, Mike and I reported the incident. But when the investigation team returned to the area, the cabin was gone. There was no trace left, except for a few deep scratches on the tree trunk, as if something huge had crawled through. From then on, I never patrolled alone again. The forest was still beautiful, still peaceful, but I knew that in its darkness, there were things we never wanted to face. I used to think I knew the woods where I worked. As a ranger, I spent my youth patrolling, exploring trails, and protecting nature. But one night, the woods I loved showed me a different side, a truth I never wanted to face. It was a pitch-black night in March. I was assigned to patrol a less-traveled area. It was a place known for its quietness, far from the main campgrounds, a place where only those who loved solitude sought out. That night, I drove slowly down the rough trail, my headlights scanning the dense trees on both sides. There were no birds, no insects. The absolute silence made me feel uneasy. As I approached a deserted campsite, I saw something that made me stop. It was a flashlight, lying on the ground in the middle of the road, its light flickering weakly. The light was still on, but no one was there. I got out of the car and picked it up. It was cold. Something was wrong. I shined my flashlight on the road ahead and saw footprints. They led deep into the woods, away from the main campsite. What was strange was that the footprints were uneven. Some were very deep, as if the person was dragging something heavy. I called out over the radio, "Anyone near the east side? I need help." But the signal was so weak that all I could hear was static. No one answered. I decided to follow the footprints, keeping a safe distance and carefully looking around. After about 15 minutes of walking, the footprints mysteriously disappeared. There were now only broken branches on the ground. I shined my flashlight around, and that's when I heard it. A small, steady tapping sound echoed in the distance. First, I thought it might be the wind hitting the trees. But no, it was too rhythmic, like someone tapping something hard on wood. "Knock! Knock! Knock!" I called out. "Who's there? I'm a ranger. If you need help, call." But there was no answer. The tapping stopped for a few seconds, then started again, closer this time. I felt like someone was luring me deeper into the woods. I kept walking, though my unease grew by the minute. After a few minutes, my flashlight beamed toward a small house in the middle of the woods. The house looked like it had been abandoned for a long time, with rotten wooden walls and broken windows. What was strange was that an oil lamp was still burning inside, flickering dimly through the window. On the doorstep, I saw a pair of old, muddy shoes, exactly the same size as the footprints I had followed. I knocked on the door. "Ranger, is anyone inside?" There was no answer. I pushed the door open and entered. Inside the house, the air was strangely stuffy. The room was empty, except for a wooden table with a few old objects. A rusty knife, a notebook, and a jar containing something crimson. As I approached the table, a sudden noise came from behind me. I turned around, and in the dark corner of the house, a figure stood there. The oil lamp didn't show his face clearly, but I saw that he was tall, thin, with eyes that glowed in the darkness. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I shouted, my hand on the walkie-talkie. He didn't answer. He just stood there, silently looking at me. Then he raised his hand, pointing at the door, as if to tell me to leave immediately. I started to back away, feeling the air in the room so cold that it was hard to breathe. As I stepped out of the house, the door behind me slammed shut. The knocking rang out again, louder and faster this time. I turned on my flashlight, shining it around, but saw nothing but the shadows of trees swaying in the wind. I ran straight toward the patrol car, not daring to look back. As I climbed into the car and closed the door, I looked through the rearview mirror. Between the trees, the figure stood there, watching me, not moving. I left the area immediately, and the next day, I returned with the inspection team. But the cabin was gone, as if it had never existed. The footprints were gone. There was only an eerie silence that enveloped the forest. From that night on, I never patrolled the eastern area alone again. I couldn't explain what had happened, and I didn't want to try. I knew that in this forest, there were things that didn't belong to our world. And sometimes the best thing you can do is leave before they notice you.
Thanks for listening to today's story. Let us know what you think. If you want to hear more scary stories, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode when we upload it. We'll always be here and welcome you.